work. But do you guys know what a blue screen is? Yeah, we're familiar with that. So here we go. So that actually is also a byproduct of Trusteer. Trusteer installs this kernel driver to encrypt keystrokes into secure processes. And part of the functionality of that kernel driver is it allows you to overwrite heap data, and you can use that to take over a system. It was actually really nice of them because Internet Explorer went through all the trouble of making sure that there were reduced privileges and everything. And Trusteer came back and gave something that allowed attackers to be able to escalate all the way back up to system privileges. So can we have a round of applause for Trusteer, please? Cool. I'm glad that worked. I was sweating up here. So we have some conclusions with antivirus. Antivirus is still a bit dangerous. The products that implement anti-malware and antivirus still, in fact, have vulnerabilities. One of the reasons that they may still have vulnerabilities is because it's hard to audit. And this isn't necessarily from a technical perspective, but when you're a security researcher and you're auditing things like antivirus and anti-malware, since they're inside the same industry, there's a lot of basically bad blood that might be had, even though what you're doing is helping them to secure their product. Also, one of the conclusions is the value proposition for antivirus needs a bit of a rework. If nobody here believes that it detects malicious programs and that it detects signatures instead, then we need something to be able to actually detect what's malicious or not. Dynamics has an interesting product with their VX class. Has everybody heard of that? Are we waking up a bit? Am I putting people to sleep? So basically, they have an interesting thing that classifies the malware based on the structural properties of the piece of malware. And that might be interesting to implement in an antivirus product. Basically, we need something better than signatures. So I'm going to basically draw all that together, and here are the implications of all of that information. So when security is believed to function as intended, what are people going to do when there's actually an incident? If people believe that there's no possible way that their boot password can be sniffed, if their laptop's lost, they may not be inclined to change passwords or to do any other thing that someone might want to do if they believe that their data was in fact compromised. Also, people who believe they're more secure, such as people who are installing Trusteer, may be more willing to engage in some risky behaviors. They may be willing to go and find a crack or something on the internet and on the same computer, on the same day, access their bank accounts and make trades. So I have somewhat of a crude metaphor. It's kind of like when you have all of these lines of code protecting other pieces of code, it's kind of like using two condoms at once. And basically, when you use two condoms at once, they generate more friction, and that can tend to create rips and basically destroy the entire purpose of a condom. And very similar to that, using more lines of code basically means we're going to expose the same data to attackers in multiple different ways. And that can lead to bad things too. So basically, what are we going to do about all this? Anybody who uses security controls should review them, not just listen to the product literature. Talk to somebody who's knowledgeable about the product from the inside out, possibly, or even contract a third party to look at that piece of software to ensure that you understand what exactly is offered by the product you're using. Another thing is, so a lot of antivirus has the same sort of end-user license agreements that a lot of the other software does. But one of the issues is if security companies resell products, there's a lot of different legal circumstances that could possibly arise for those companies. So because of that, it's a lot harder for someone who's employed by a security company who sells this product from a VAR perspective to actually take a look into these products. So what I recommend is that you only use products that don't create those legal loopholes. You only use products that allow everybody very permissively to audit those pieces of software, because that's how we're going to be able to get better products in the future. Also, when you can, always prefer patching and minimizing the amount of code to increasing the amount of code. Don't try to fix a bandage with a bandage, because you only have two bandages then. So another thing to do would be to encourage peers and anybody else in the security industry to dismiss the stigma that's associated with having vulnerabilities in a product. Every product has vulnerabilities. If it's of a sufficiently complex nature, it's going to have bugs inside of it. And having that stigma makes it harder to review products from industry companies and companies in general. By saying, oh, this product is horrible because it has vulnerabilities in it, basically you're giving those companies who produce that software the ability to say, this affects my bottom line, this is going to turn people off from using my product, and in the end it doesn't help anybody. It makes it harder for people to actually look at it in the future. So I recently got into stock trading, and I decided I was going to make some forward-looking statements. So one thing that I think that's going to happen in the future is that more products are going to be introduced with tantalizing claims. Has everybody heard about the stuff with Liget security and all that? Yeah, they're not going to be the first, and there's going to be lots of others who make wild and crazy claims inside the security space. And the idea is, if they're saying something that you don't think can be true or possible, it's probably not true, nor is it possible. And once they make those claims, the claims will be made humble again by people who are able to actually look at that and say, no, this security claim doesn't stand up. So another thing is that more security products are going to have vulnerabilities discovered, patched, disclosed, and exploited. Basically, it's going to happen. Security products are... does anybody here write security products for a living? Okay, we have a few people. So basically, anybody who writes security products knows that there's a lot of lines of code. You have to do crazy things. You have to be able to implement your own parsers. Basically, they're incredibly complex, and because of that, it's guaranteed that there's going to be vulnerabilities in that software that will be discovered. So this is kind of what I'm hoping, and if you can spread the word, I'm thinking it could be one of those things that if you say it enough, it becomes true. I think eventually security companies are going to start offering bug bounties. And what's interesting is, even if it doesn't necessarily motivate researchers, if a company offers a bug bounty, what they're saying is it's completely all right to audit our code. It's completely all right no matter what legal agreements we may have in place, because they're encouraging it through monetary incentives. So I guess that's it. Do we have questions? Anything? Absolutely. So one thing is the security industry itself. Oh, you want me to repeat the question? Okay, so the question was, what's the end game here? Are we going to keep on getting security software where there's vulnerabilities that come out and it's not good enough? And what I think is the security community itself, and this is something that we all tend to forget, is still an infant in the entire field of computer science. And because of that, I think what we're doing is we're learning, and there's going to be people who are making claims that basically, if you look back at the California gold rush, that there's lots of gold in this area of California, even though there's not. And what I think is going to happen after a while is, if auditing these products is encouraged and if people pay attention to these types of things, then what I think will happen is the products will eventually mature to the point where they're generally useful. So the security companies are doing their due diligence. One of the issues is Microsoft has every researcher looking at it. It's very well known that if you find Microsoft vulnerabilities, you'll be invited to their black hat party. It's very well known that there will be no legal consequences, and because of that, they have the entire industry, every single company that's looking to make a name for themselves, finding vulnerabilities inside of Microsoft code. The issue is with security products in general, they kind of have a weaker security posture right now, because they don't have all those eyes on their code. They don't have all those people looking into it because of all that stigma I mentioned throughout the presentation. So I don't want to comment on any specific incidents or name any specific vendors, but in general, when you find a vulnerability inside of a security product, they tend to be harder to deal with. They tend to not acknowledge the fact that you did any research, and they tend to take it basically as saying that their product is completely inadequate, and that's not the truth. I mean, I was making jokes up here about how the security things were vulnerable, but it was because you guys were sleeping, so I'm going to blame it all on you. Anybody else? Yeah, Tavis. What's my opinion of what? Oh, so exactly. Whitelisting technologies, I like those. And the reason I like whitelisting technologies is because it follows that principle. Basically what you're saying is you can only execute this small amount of code. You can only execute these small amounts of things that basically it limits your attack surface and makes you more secure by limiting the amount of code that can be run. Yeah, absolutely. Who here wants to implement whitelisting that tries to secure things? How hard is it? Yeah, super hard. I got a few laughs that time. That was the first time all day. So basically, whitelisting is super hard to get right. And because of that, I think those areas are starting to mature more. As one of those things where I said the security industry is starting to mature more, I think whitelisting is something that we'll see in the next 10 years potentially, and we'll be able to do it in a more streamlined fashion. Anybody else? It depends how you define logic vulnerability, right? Because Trusteer was not developed to be able to turn off like that necessarily. So potentially it is a logic vulnerability from the perspective of you're able to execute code without corrupting memory, and it's something that basically can turn off all of the security that's offered by it. So potentially you could look at that as a logic vulnerability. With all of these things, so my job generally isn't to secure things. My job is basically to figure out where the vulnerabilities are in new technologies. But basically, I don't look at them as logic vulnerabilities or heap overflows until I need to classify them. I generally look at them as extended functionality. And by extended functionality, I mean being able to execute code remotely. Anybody else? I think that's it then. Thank you all for coming.